we talked about the parts of the brain, and we talked about how that they communicate with each other. Let's talk about how they communicate with each other. So the cells involved are neurons, just like we talked about in chapter 14. But within the brain and within the spinal cord, we have specific names for different groups of neurons because they're not clustered together in the same way they are in a nerve. A nerve is going to be something in the peripheral nervous system carrying neurons through other tissues. Here we have groups of axons going into the same place within neuronal tissue, and so we don't need all of those protective layers the way we have in nerves, like the epineurium and the perineurium. So it's going to be slightly different structurally. But we do still have groups of neurons moving from one place to another, going with a similar function. So those groups of axons are called association tracts. And a tract is just a big piece of something, big group of something. So we're going to have some tracts that connect gyri in one hemisphere or lobes in one hemisphere, and then we're going to have others that cross hemispheres. So the small ones that go from one gyrus to the next make little arcs, and so they're called Rq8 fibers. You remember that Rq8 just means arc-shaped, so these are just fibers, groups of axons going from one gyrus to the next. So for example, from the motor cortex to the motor association area. The longer ones that are going to go, say, from a couple of gyri across or from one lobe to another, these are going to be called longitudinal fasciculi. So longitudinal meaning they go lengthwise. They're going to travel within one hemisphere. And fasciculi meaning bundle, just like fascicle, okay? So it's a bundle of fibers, and these fibers are axons. So for example, we're going to have longitudinal fasciculi that go from the frontal lobe to the parietal lobe, or the occipital lobe, or the temporal lobe. We've got to have longitudinal fasciculi to get signals from the Wernicke area to the motor speech area so that we can talk, okay? So Rq8 fibers are short, little arcs of axons. Longitudinal fasciculi are fascicles, or large groups going long distance. Now, commissural tracts are going to go from one hemisphere to the other. A commissure is a word for a bridge going across hemispheres. We're going to have commissures in the brain and the spinal cord. Commissural tracts are just the groups of axons going across. So the largest commissural tract or group of commissural tracts is in the corpus callosum. And you remember that's this bundle of white matter where the right hemisphere communicates with the left hemisphere. Okay, later on in the Canvas module, there's going to be a video of a person who has had their corpus callosum cut as a treatment for seizures for which there is no other treatment. It's a pretty severe thing to do, to cut the communication between the two sides of the brain. And the interesting thing is that in a lot of daily activities, it doesn't have any effect, but it does have an interesting effect in some things that come up. So I'll let you watch that video. It's really interesting. Anyway, so commissural tracts are going to make or be part of commissures, which are bridges from right to left. So we have these, the corpus callosum is a commissural tract, and then we also have projection tracts, which are going to project from the brain down into the spinal cord. Now, these are also going to cross to the other side. Okay, so you see this here. These projection tracts go down in the medulla oblongata at a spot called the decussation in the pyramids. It's going to cross to the other side. You don't actually need to know that name. That shouldn't be bold. So that's the forms of communication. And then our next section, we'll start to talk about some of these structures inside the brain that you may not be familiar with.